Welcome to Reformed Thinking. You know, um, why is it that the most highly educated, the most morally stringent people often harbor the absolute darkest secrets?
Yeah, that is the big question, isn't it? It is a fascinating
It
paradox.
really is, because think about it. When we talk about a financial audit or, say, a trial in a courtroom, there is this expectation of clinical precision.
Right, you have the documents.
Yeah, the accountant spots the missing funds, the lawyer points to the specific clause in the contract, and, everything is very visible. You have the evidence, you get the verdict, it is clean.
It's very objective.
But then you step into the world of human morality, specifically that internal landscape of self-righteousness, and suddenly that clinical precision it vanishes entirely.
It gets incredibly murky.
Ah, so murky. Mostly because human beings we are absolute masters at hiding our own moral bankruptcy behind this shiny veneer of superiority.
We really are. We build these elaborate defenses.
We do. And so we are thrilled you are joining us for this deep dive today. Grab a seat. You are right here in the room with us as the third person in this conversation, and we are going to investigate how that self-deception actually works.
And we have some incredible tools to do that today.
We really do. We are going to look at the original Greek vocabulary of the Apostle Paul in the second chapter of Romans.
Yeah.
And we are utilizing some brilliant linguistic analysis from 19th century scholarship, Marvin Vincent's word studies.
Which is just a gold mine for this sort of thing. The linguistic precision available in that original Greek is, frankly, it's astonishing.
It's like a scalpel.
Spot on. That is the mission of our discussion today, really. To unpack the precise vocabulary used to completely dismantle religious self-conceit. We want to see how that original language operates like a scalpel on the human heart.
And even though we are looking at ancient texts and ancient definitions, they remain so incredibly relevant to human behavior today,
Oh, absolutely. The psychological mechanisms of hypocrisy, of self-justification, the internal strife, they are the exact same now as they were in the first century.
The human condition hasn't changed.
Not a bit. The text is diagnosing the human condition, and looking at the original language, well, it hands us the dictionary to understand that diagnosis.
So let's start by looking at the psychological trap of the critic. We're looking at the attitude of a person who feels entirely secure while they are, busy passing judgment on everybody else.
The armchair quarterback of morality.
Yeah. And the text uses very specific words to shatter that false security. The first phrase is right at the beginning of the chapter. It just says, "Oh, man."
Just, oh, man.
Right. That feels surprisingly blunt. It strips away all the titles. It doesn't say, "Oh, scholar," or "Oh, righteous one," or "Oh, elder."
No, it reduces the critic down to their basic humanity. It sets the stage for leveling the playing field completely.
So why start there?
Well, Vincent points out that, oh man, is a general address, yes, but it carries this slightly reproachful reference, specifically aimed at the religious elite in this historical context.
Oh, interesting. Like a reality check.
Yeah, it's a reminder of creatureliness. When a person elevates themselves to the position of a moral judge, they begin to view themselves as something more than just human.
They start acting like God.
Basically, yes. They identify with the divine lawgiver. So by starting with, oh man, the text just yanks the critic right off that self-appointed pedestal and places them right back in the dirt with the rest of humanity.
That is such a vivid image. And then we hit the action that this person is taking. The English translation says, "judgest." Now, when I read the English word judge, I usually think of someone just, forming a private opinion.
Right, like an observation.
Yeah, I look at someone's behavior and think, oh, that was a bad decision. But looking at the Greek word here, which is krinon, this feels much more aggressive.
It is much heavier.
It feels like I'm not just observing, I am putting on the black robe and banging a gavel.
That is a highly accurate distinction. Krinon does not refer to mere observation or discernment.
Because we need discernment, right?
Of course. Discernment is necessary for life. You have to discern between good and evil to function. But krinon carries the strict sense of condemning.
Condemning? Wow.
You are assuming the prerogative of the final judge. You are handing down a guilty verdict on another human being.
Which, let's be honest, feels pretty good sometimes.
It does. There is a psychological rush that comes with condemning another person.
Yeah.
It gives you this quick hit of superiority.
Like a dopamine hit of righteousness.
Yeah. When you look at someone else's failure and pronounce condemnation, you are implicitly telling yourself, well, I am not like them.
Right. Which leads perfectly into the very next verse where the text talks about the judgment of God. And Vincent makes a fascinating distinction here about the Greek word tokrima.
Yes, to krima. This is crucial because it does not mean the act of judging.
It doesn't.
No, it refers to the contents of the judgment. It is the actual verdict, the sentence itself.
Oh, I see.
So the critic is busy doing the action of judging, the krinon.
Banging the gavel.
Right, but God alone possesses the to krima, the actual substantive authoritative verdict.
So the human critic is essentially playing make-believe in a courtroom where they have absolutely zero jurisdiction.
That's a great way to put it. They're pretending to be the judge, but they have no authority to issue the to krima.
This brings up a massive question about cognitive dissonance, though.
Yeah.
How does the critic rationalize this?
It takes a lot of mental gymnastics.
It has to. How do they sit there condemning others while thinking they are totally safe themselves? And Vincent highlights a specific word here, reckonist. The Greek is logiza.
Logiza.
Is it really a calculated thing? Because I always assume people just slipped into hypocrisy blindly, like almost by accident. You just drift into it. But this word suggests something way more deliberate.
It is entirely deliberate. Logiza implies a calculated process of reasoning. It is actually the root of our English word logic.
Logic. Wow.
So this means the person judging others hasn't just made a casual mistake in self-awareness. They have actually convinced themselves through a deliberate, logical process that they are going to escape the consequences of their own actions.
So they've run the math in their head.
They've tallied it all up. They look at their religious heritage, their theological knowledge, maybe their moral superiority in a few visible areas, and they conclude, I am exempt. The rules apply to everyone else, but I found a loophole.
And the text responds to that internal math with an emphatic thou in the phrase, thou shalt escape. Vincent notes this is directly opposed to that self-conceit. It's like poking a finger right in the chest of the critic. Do you think you will escape?
It's very confrontational.
It reminds me of, think of an auditor who is meticulously finding flaws in a massive corporation's accounting.
Okay, I picture that.
Imagine this auditor sitting in their office, and they're finding every single misplaced penny, every slight violation of the tax code by this company. They are ruthless.
Leaving no stone unturned.
Right. But they are completely oblivious to the fact that at that very moment, their own personal bank account is being seized by the government for massive intentional tax evasion.
Oh, that's a brilliant picture of it.
How does someone rationalize that disconnect? How do you sit there auditing someone else's pennies while your own house is literally burning down?
Well, the rationale comes from a fundamental misinterpretation of their current circumstances.
What do you mean?
They look at the fact that they haven't been struck by lightning yet.
Right.
And they interpret that delay as an endorsement of their behavior.
Oh, wow.
They confuse a delay in consequences with an exemption from consequences.
That is a dangerous confusion.
Incredibly dangerous.
All right.
Because the roof hasn't caved in on them while they're passing judgment, their logiza, their internal logic, tells them, well, God must approve of what I'm doing. Otherwise, he would have stopped me.
Which sets up a declarative question in the text. Despisest thou? The indicative move here, it unites a declaration with the question. It's not just asking for information like, hey, do you despise this?
No, it's an accusation.
Right. It is saying, do you despise? Aye, you do. It is an accusation framed as an inquiry. And what are they despising? The text points to the riches of God's goodness, forbearance, and long-suffering.
And Paul loves using that word riches, the Greek plotou, to describe the overwhelming quality of these divine attributes.
But let's zero in on that word forbearance, because the Greek is anakes. And if we look at classical Greek, this is perhaps one of the most revealing word studies we can do. What does anakes actually mean?
Anakes, or forbearance, strictly means a holding back.
A holding back.
Yes. In classical Greek literature, it is mostly used to describe a truce of arms.
A military term.
Yes. It implies something temporary which may pass away under new conditions. The 19th century scholar Richard Chenevix's Trench clarifies this beautifully in the source material. He says it is a suspense of wrath.
A suspense.
Right. It is a truce with the sinner, but it by no means implies that the wrath is gone.
A truce of arms. Let's think about the visceral difference between, say, a military ceasefire and a permanent peace treaty.
There is a massive difference.
Huge. If two nations sign a peace treaty, the war is over. The weapons are decommissioned. You can go back to normal life, plant your crops, sleep soundly.
The threat is removed.
Exactly. I mean, absolutely. But a ceasefire just means that the guns are still loaded, the soldiers are still in the trenches, they're in the mud, their fingers are on the triggers, but the commander has just said, hold your fire for 10 minutes.
That is a terrifying reality to sit in.
Right. And the critic in this scenario, they are mistaking a temporary, highly tense ceasefire for a permanent peace treaty. They think the war is over, but God is just holding back the firing order to give them a chance to surrender.
That analogy captures the theology here so well. Trench explicitly says the wrath will certainly be executed unless the sinner is found under new conditions of repentance and obedience.
So the clock is ticking.
Yes. The critic relies on God's tolerance, assuming that God has just suspended the rules of his administration just for them.
Because they're so special.
Right. And to rely on that temporary ceasefire to continue funding your hypocrisy. That is the very definition of contempt. You are looking at the commander who is mercifully holding back the firing squad, and you are using that extra time to commit more treason.
Wow. So what does this all mean for the actions of the critic? The text says they treasure up wrath. The Greek is throzoresis. It means to accumulate.
To hoard.
Yeah, to hoard. This is a striking, horrific irony. We just talked about the riches of God's goodness, the Pluto. A sane person would want to store up and receive those riches. But instead, what is the hypocrite accumulating?
They are building a treasury of their own destruction. Every time they pass judgment on someone else, every time they rely on their own logical loopholes to justify their hypocrisy, they're making a deposit into a bank account of wrath.
A bank account of wrath? That is chilling.
It is. The forthcoming of that wrath is only currently withheld by the anachase, that temporary ceasefire we just discussed. They are meticulously saving up for a retirement of absolute ruin, completely unaware that the currency they are hoarding is their own doom.
That is an incredibly sobering reality. We have a person resting securely, building this invisible treasury of impending consequences, completely oblivious that the truce is temporary.
They think they are rich, but they are bankrupt.
So if the hypocrite is treating God's patience like a permanent peace treaty instead of a temporary ceasefire, what actually happens to the human mind when that ceasefire abruptly ends? Because Vincent notes, the text gives us a surprisingly physical description of spiritual anguish.
It does, but before we get to the physical description of the anguish, the text briefly characterizes the attitude of those facing it. It uses the word contentious, which is exeretheus.
Exeretheus.
A better translation, according to Vincent, is factious. It refers to intriguers and partisan agitators.
Partisan agitators. That feels incredibly contemporary, doesn't it?
Oh, very much so.
The political nature of religious hypocrisy is something we see constantly. People building theological or moral factions just to, consolidate their own influence.
They thrive on setting people against each other to elevate their own status.
Yeah.
They are not just arguing for the sake of truth. They're arguing to build a tribe.
Right. But let's look at the consequences for these agitators. The text mentions tribulation and anguish. The word for anguish is stenaturia. And Vincent's notes say, we need to spend some time here because the psychological weight of this word is staggering.
Stenaturia literally translates to narrowness of place.
Narrowness of place.
The dominant idea here is constraint. You are pressed in. And to grasp the full terror of this word, Vincent connects it back to Old Testament imagery.
Where specifically?
In Deuteronomy chapter 28, this concept is used to describe the absolute terrifying confinement of a siege.
A siege. Okay, so enemies have surrounded your city. They have cut off your food, your water, your avenues of escape. The walls are literally closing in.
You're trapped.
Let's map that visceral, terrifying physical reality directly onto the modern experience of guilt and anxiety. Because if someone is locked in a dark closet, the claustrophobia they feel isn't just a legal fiction, it is a physical panic. Your chest tightens.
Your breathing gets shallow.
Yes. Is the text saying that the consequence of hypocrisy is a literal narrowing of your existence, like the spiritual walls actually close in on you?
Precisely. The soul that refuses to surrender to the truth finds its reality shrinking. Think about the paranoia of a siege. You are constantly watching the dwindling resources. You are trapped with your own thoughts, your own fears, your own starving nature.
That sounds like a panic attack of the soul.
That is the spiritual reality of the hypocrite.
Yeah.
They thought they were building a fortress to keep everyone else outright, but they actually built a prison cell for themselves.
Wow.
And Vincent quotes the theologian Thomas Aquinas, who provides a brilliant contrast to this state. Aquinas noted the Latin phrase, Laetitia est Laetitia.
Laetitia est Laetitia, meaning?
Joy is breath.
Joy is breath. Oh, I love that.
It's beautiful.
Because when you tell the truth, when you live without hypocrisy, you don't have to keep track of your lies. You don't have to maintain the faction. You can breathe.
Think about the Psalms. When the psalmist describes being delivered by God, they often say, He brought me forth also into a large room. Or, he set my feet in a broad place.
Broad places. Freedom.
Joy, freedom, and truth are expansive. They open up the horizon. Sin, hypocrisy, and judgment are restrictive. They constrain you. They lock you in the claustrophobic siege of your own making.
So the hypocritical critic thinks they're operating in this broad, superior realm, sitting high above everyone else, when in reality, they are meticulously laying the bricks of their own narrow cell.
Brick by brick.
And the text seals this by stating God has no respect of persons. The Greek here is proshypomsia.
Yes, meaning impartiality.
Impartiality. It reminds me of the law of gravity. Gravity doesn't care if you are a prince or a pauper. If you jump off a building, you fall.
It applies to everyone equally.
Right. And this spiritual law is just as impartial. It doesn't matter what your religious title is, what your ancestry is, or how well you can articulate theology. The constraint of the soul, that siege, it applies equally to all who operate in faction and hypocrisy.
And the impartiality of this judgment forces us to ask a crucial question about how the standard is applied. The text moves on to discuss two very different groups of people.
Who are they?
Well, you have those who possess the formal written law of Moses, and you have the Gentiles who do not. And Vincent's notes reveal a fascinating internal mechanism for how this impartial judgment plays out across these different groups.
Right. The text forces us to define what we actually mean by law. It talks about those without law, which is animus, and those in the law, which is onomi.
Yes.
Now, I understand there is a significant linguistic debate here over the fact that in the original Greek, the definite article the is sometimes missing before the word law.
That is a major point of discussion among scholars.
Why does a missing article change the entire scope of the concept? That seems like such a tiny detail.
It seems small, but it changes everything. Scholars like Kramer and Bishop Lightfoot, whom Vincent references, argue that when the article is absent, the stress is not on the historical outward form of the Mosaic Code.
Okay, so it's not talking about the stone tablets or the scrolls.
No. Instead, law is being considered as a principle. The law as a principle is exemplified chiefly and signally in the Mosaic Law, sure, but its application is much wider.
It's bigger than the document.
Yes. The principle of law is the inherent standard of right and wrong, the moral fabric of the universe itself. The Mosaic Code is just the localized, written expression of that universal principle.
So both groups face the reality of this law, but the nature of the evaluation differs. Those with a formal written code will be subjected to a detailed inquiry against that specific itemized document. The people with the code get graded by the code,
according to the specific rules they claim to uphold.
But then the text targets the specific attitude of the people who possess that written document. It calls them hearers, and the Greek word is akroatai. Now, this isn't just someone who happens to hear something in passing, is it?
No, akroatai designates a characteristic feature. It describes those whose actual business is hearing.
Their business is hearing.
Yes. Vincent compares them to those who regularly attended the synagogue, absorbing the reading of the law week after week. Hearing the law became their identity, their occupation, rather than actually obeying the law.
We really need to talk about the modern parallel to this because the delusion of the professional hearer is everywhere today.
Oh, it is rampant.
Think about how modern people consume information. You and I sitting here, and the listener joining us on this deep dive, we listen to analytical discussions, we read heavy theological books, we gather massive amounts of data about morality and philosophy.
We fill our heads with it.
Right. And we trick ourselves into thinking that because we comprehend the mechanics of the truth, we are somehow living the truth.
That is the trap.
We fall into the trap of being professional akro-ah. It's like you buy a book on discipline, you put it on your shelf, and you get this dopamine hit as if you actually woke up at 5 a.m. and went to the gym.
You feel accomplished just for making the purchase.
Exactly. Or you listen to a deep dive on moral integrity, and you feel righteous just for consuming the audio.
It is the dangerous delusion that comprehension equals compliance.
Comprehension equals compliance.
Wow. You can have a doctorate in the ethical teachings of the New Testament and still be a fundamentally unethical person. The acquisition of the data provides a false sense of accomplishment. The intellect is satisfied, so the conscience goes to sleep.
So if the professional hearers are judged by the written code they consume, what happens to the people without the written code? Because the text gives us a look at the internal debate of the human mind.
It does, and it's fascinating psychology.
It says that specific individuals among the Gentiles show the work of the law in themselves, their conscience bearing witness. The Greek phrase uses a prefix that implies acting therewith, meaning the conscience acts in agreement or disagreement with the standard regarding a specific act.
Right.
But the most stunning phrase to me is the meanwhile, or one with another. The Greek is metaxou. What's happening with metaxou?
Well, there are several interpretations of metaxou. Some try to say this refers to people debating other people outwardly, like accusing or vindicating one another in public society.
It's a town hall debate.
Right. But Vincent points out that the entire context here is internal. The accurate interpretation, which aligns with Henry Alfred's view, is that metaxou refers to thought against thought in inner strife.
Thought against thought.
It is the mutual relation and interchange of individual thoughts within a single soul.
That is the courtroom inside your own head.
Absolutely.
One thought stands up as the prosecutor, pointing out your guilt and demanding a penalty. You shouldn't have done that. You lied.
And then the defense attorney stands up.
Yes. Another thought tries to rationalize your actions, pointing to extenuating circumstances. Well, I was tired and they deserved it. The jury is your conscience, and the judge is that unwritten principle of law written on your heart.
You don't need a stone tablet to experience that internal prosecution. You just need to be human.
Everyone listening to this right now knows exactly what that internal courtroom feels like, that late-night anxiety where you replay an argument.
And that inner court is relentless. It operates day and night. And Paul asserts what the ultimate standard of this judgment will be, calling it my gospel. The internal strife of the conscience is just a localized reflection of the absolute standard found in the truth.
The internal prosecutor is pointing toward a very real external verdict.
Precisely.
Now we turn the spotlight fiercely onto those who boast of having the formal code and the highest level of education. We are moving into the illusion of privilege.
This is where it gets really uncomfortable for the educated elite.
The text starts taking apart the theological resume of the educated hypocrite. It says they bear the name of a Jew. The Greek is eponymasa.
Eponymasa.
Ah.
This was the theocratic title of honor. It was the ultimate badge of religious legitimacy in that culture.
And what do they do with that badge? They rest in the law. The Greek word here is epanapau.
And Vincent notes the radical conception of that verb is relief.
The relief.
Yes. It signifies a blind trust in God as an exclusive protector based purely on possessing the document.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Is it not a good thing to trust in the law? Is it not a virtue to find relief in the Word of God? Why is epanapau being condemned here?
Because there is a massive difference between submitting to the law and using the law as an exemption badge.
Okay, break that down.
To trust the law means you allow it to govern your actions. You obey it. To epanapau, to blindly rest in it, as described here, means you view the possession of the law as a shield against personal conviction.
So it's not about doing what it says, it's just holding it up like a talisman.
Right. You are not finding relief in your obedience to the law. You are finding relief in the mere fact that you own the scroll. It is an assumption of immunity based purely on association.
I'm in the club, so I'm safe.
Spot on.
And because they feel this artificial relief, they occupy their time with high-level intellectual exercises rather than basic moral obedience. The text says they approve the things that are more excellent, or things which differ. The Greek is ta diapheranta.
Ta diapheranta. This is the ability to test questions of casuistry with nice discrimination.
Casuistry, we don't use that word much.
Casuistry is the resolving of moral problems by the application of theoretical rules to particular instances.
It's like splitting hairs.
Yes. In other words, they are experts at parsing out the absolute finest, most minute details of theology and ethics. They can split a theological hair into 1,000 pieces. They have nice, sharp, critical discrimination.
And they got this ability from being instructed, which is the Greek word ekatochumenos.
Which refers to systematic, rigorous catechetical training.
And because of this rigorous training, they elevate themselves over everyone else. The text uses distinct words to describe how they view themselves. They are an instructor, or paidut, which emphasizes being a corrector holding a disciplinary rod.
They love to correct.
And they are correcting babes, or nikyun, which is a highly condescending term for novices.
Very patronizing.
Finally, they possess the form of knowledge. The Greek is morphin. Now, Vincent clarifies this isn't just a fake appearance, right?
Correct. It is not a fake outline. It is the correct embodiment of the lineaments of truth.
Yeah.
They actually possess the accurate, orthodox framework. The syllabus is completely correct.
That sets up the central tragedy of the passage, doesn't it? The syllabus is perfect, but the soul is corrupt.
That's the heart of it.
Let's explore why that happens. They have the perfect theology and the finest discrimination of casuistry. Think of an art critic who has studied at the finest institutions in the world. They can look at a masterpiece and they can perfectly describe the brushstrokes, the use of light, the historical context of the pigment. They have the morphiz, the framework of the knowledge of art.
They know all the theory.
But if you hand that critic a brush and a canvas, they cannot paint a stick figure. They have zero actual ability to produce the art they criticize. How does this theoretical perfection lead to such gross hypocrisy?
Well, it leads to hypocrisy because the human ego uses the theoretical perfection as a shield against personal conviction. The internal logic we talked about earlier, the logizo, it says, because I can perfectly articulate the standard, I have somehow met the standard.
They confuse knowing with doing.
Yes. The intellect absorbs the truth, but the will is fundamentally corrupt and refuses to submit to it. And by policing others' behavior, they trigger a psychological reward in their own brains that makes them feel righteous, thereby completely blinding them to their own transgressions. The will betrays the intellect.
And the text drops the hammer on those actions with shocking indictments. It lists their theoretical preaching against their actual behavior, preaching against stealing, but stealing, preaching against adultery, but committing it.
And this wasn't just rhetorical exaggeration.
Right. Vincent shares historical context from the text itself. The Talmud actually charges the crime of adultery upon the three most illustrious rabbins of that era.
The very men who were the chief correctors of babes were guilty of the grossest violations of the law they taught.
But the final indictment is the one that is so jarring to me. The text says, "Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege?" The word for abhorrest is delusomenos.
Delusomenos. That verb originally means to turn away from a thing on account of the stench.
Stench, like it smells bad.
Yes, it is a visceral, physical disgust. The religious elite view an idol not just as a theological error, but as something that physically reeks. They cover their noses in disgust at the pagan temples.
But then they are accused of committing sacrilege. The Greek is hierousulos, which translates directly to robbing temples. How does someone who covers their nose at the stench of a pagan idol end up robbing temples?
It's pure cognitive dissonance.
What is the justification required for this?
Well, their greed overpowers their theological disgust. Historical records detail how they would actually pillage idol temples. Despite their disgust for the idols, the gold and silver in those temples were incredibly tempting.
So the money didn't sting.
Right. Or, alternatively, they would embezzle from their own Jewish temple by withholding the temple tribute. Vincent points out that the historian Josephus records a law specifically instructing the Jews not to plunder Gentile temples.
And you don't write a law against something unless it's a widespread problem.
Exactly. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
You only legislate against what people are actively doing. So you have these highly educated instructors boasting in the law, disgusted by paganism, secretly plundering the very pagan shrines they claim to abhor. The disconnect between the syllabus and the soul is absolute.
To fully grasp the mechanics of this hypocrisy, we really need to understand the precise vocabulary of human failure. The Greek language is incredibly precise in how it categorizes our rebellion.
It has a word for every flavor of failure.
It does. Vincent turns to Trench to provide this masterclass on the vocabulary of sin. Let's walk through Trench's catalog of these words because the nuance here is essential for understanding our own hearts. Let's start with the most common word for sin, hamartia.
Hamartia is the missing of a mark. Imagine an archer aiming at a target and the arrow falls short or goes wide.
So it's a failure to hit the standard.
Right. It is the general state of falling short of perfection.
Next is periko.
This is disobedience to a voice. You hear the command, the instruction is clear in your ears, and you actively refuse to listen. It is inattentive or rebellious hearing.
Then we have paraptoma.
A falling when one should have stood. This implies a lack of footing, a slip, a failure of moral balance in a moment where you are expected to remain upright. It speaks to the weakness of the human constitution.
What about agnomema?
Ignorance of what one should know. And this is not innocent ignorance. This is culpable ignorance.
Like willful blindness.
Yes. It is failing to know the law when the law was readily available to be studied. It is burying your head in the sand so you don't have to be held accountable.
Then there's hotoma.
A diminishing of what should be rendered in full measure. Think of a merchant using rigged scales, holding back a portion of what is owed. It is a failure to give the creator or your neighbor their full due.
Anomia or paranomia?
Non-observance of the law, just a general state of lawlessness, or a refusal to be governed by any standard.
And finally, plemelia.
Discord. This is actually a musical term.
Really?
Yes. It means playing out of tune, creating a jarring, ugly sound in the moral symphony of the universe.
Wow, that is a massive catalog of failure. But there is one specific word used to describe the educated hypocrite in this passage. The text calls their action a transgression, and the Greek is parabasis.
Parabustus.
This word is distinct from all the others we just listed, and it is the crux of the argument against the professional hearer. What makes parabasis so different?
The primary sense of the preposition para means beside or by, with reference to a line or an extended surface. Therefore, parabasis indicates that which is not on its true line, but beside it.
Beside the line.
Yes. Vincent uses a quote from the historian Thucydides, who writes about a city coming near such peril, using this exact concept. They were parallel to the danger, running right alongside it but not touching it. Parabasis implies a known boundary. You cannot have a parabasis without a specifically defined line to cross.
Let's use an analogy to make the distinction between general sin, the missing of the mark, and explicit transgression, the parabasis.
Okay.
Imagine two hikers. The first hiker is wandering in a vast, unmarked forest. They get turned around, they lose their bearings, and they miss the correct path back to the lodge. They failed to hit the mark of their destination. That is hamartia.
They are lost.
They sinned, they are lost, and the consequences of being lost are very real. They might freeze or starve.
The consequences are real, but the nature of the offense is very different from the second hiker.
Right. The second hiker is walking on a paved road. They walk right up to a chain link fence. There is a brightly painted yellow line on the ground. There is a massive red sign at eye level that says, "Danger, do not cross minefield."
Very clear instructions.
The hiker reads the sign, understands the sign, looks down at the yellow line, and deliberately lifts their foot and steps over it. That is parabasis. That is transgression.
That analogy captures the theology perfectly. Adam's failure in the garden is explicitly called a transgression, a parabasis, because it was the violation of a definite spoken command. He had the line and he stepped over it.
He wasn't just wandering in the woods.
No. Sin, hamartia, was in the world before the written law was given. People were missing the mark. They were morally lost in the forest. But with the introduction of the written law, with the painting of that bright yellow line, sin becomes explicitly a transgression. You now know exactly where the boundary is, and you choose to violate it anyway.
So when the text calls the educated elite a breaker of the law, a transgressor, it is the most devastating indictment possible. It is saying you are not just wandering in the woods, you are the one holding the map. You are the one who painted the yellow line, and you are deliberately stepping over it.
It is the ultimate failure of privilege. And Vincent points to the Greek philosopher Plato to illustrate this. In his work on laws, Plato provides a staggering philosophical parallel to this.
What does Plato say?
He describes the tragedy of a citizen found guilty of great wrong against the state. Plato says the judge must deem this citizen to be incurable.
Incurable. Why?
Because the judge must remember what an education and training this citizen had from his youth upward. He had all the advantages, all the instruction, all the structural support to be virtuous, and yet he still did not abstain from the greatest of crimes.
So the education didn't fix him?
The education did not cure the soul. It only made the rebellion more explicit, more calculated, and in the end, incurable.
The incurable citizen. The person who uses their theological education not as a mirror to examine their own soul, but as a mask to hide their deliberate transgressions.
Sobering thought.
We have covered a massive amount of linguistic and psychological ground today. The text draws a stark line between two very different pursuits of validation. Vincent notes that the word Jew literally means the praised one, referencing the blessing in the book of Genesis. That etymology reveals the core conflict.
It does. The hypocrite seeks human validation based on outward titles, logical loopholes, the possession of codes, and the ability to parse fine arguments. They want the title of the praised one from the society around them.
They want the applause.
But the text points to an internal reality. It is the difference between curating a resume of theoretical righteousness to impress your peers versus possessing a genuine internal submission to the truth that only the Creator can see and validate.
So we leave you with this to evaluate in your own internal landscape. Are you acting as a professional hearer? Are you collecting facts, theological nuances, and moral data points simply to build a treasury of self-conceit while secretly crossing the very lines you condemn others for crossing?
Or are you genuinely submitting your inner thoughts, that internal courtroom of strife, to the absolute standard of truth?
It is a heavy question, but as the original Greek language has shown us today, avoiding it is simply a calculated logic that leads to a very, very narrow place. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.